Hey, friends, today's topic is something called theodicy, which is a fancy way of talking about the problem of evil. And if you were to boil this down to one thing or one sentence, it would be a question. Why do bad things happen to good people? This is something I've wondered about many times. I'm sure many of you have been through this also. It came up recently when I was having a discussion with a good friend of mine. We were talking about spiritual concepts. He had suffered loss. As many of you know, I have also. We lost our son. My wife has been through a very long, protracted illness. And why do these bad things happen to good people? Um, Corollary to that, or another question is, why do prayers sometimes work and sometimes don't work? And I've seen people pray in all different languages, all different religions. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. This is actually a topic for a whole different podcast. But why do some prayers appear to be answered and others not? Certainly, I prayed for the recovery and the healing of my son, which did not happen. And I know many other people that prayed for the recovery of their loved ones, or to keep God, please keep my baby from dying. Um, those are very painful things to go through. And a lot of times, the way that people explain this, why these things happen to good people, they explain it by simply saying that God works in mysterious ways. We don't understand God's plan. My friend actually explained it to me in a way that I thought was interesting and helpful. For those of you that do needlepoint, or I believe me, I don't do a needlepoint, but I've seen my wife has done needlepoints before. And when you look at the back side of the needlepoint, there's threads going every place and colors. It's just a jumble. It's confusion. It's chaos. When you turn it over to the other side, you see the beautiful design or the words or the picture or whatever the needlepoint's supposed to be. It looks absolutely beautiful on the other side. So sometimes the analogy my friend used for me was that all we can see is the back side of the needlepoint and the chaos. And then once we die and we're in the presence of our Lord or God, we'll see the beautiful tapestry that was all put together for a specific purpose. I love that analogy. It doesn't make me want to stop asking questions or try to better understand how things happen. And that's why I'm doing this podcast and my book and everything, is to share. My experience has been I was always comfortable with God works in mysterious ways till we lost our son. And I started going through this process. Well, why did this happen? Why didn't prayer work? Why did this happen to us? Why did this happen to him? And then, of course, other stories of other people. Why did this happen to other people? So the short answer is I don't know, and you don't know. But there are people that have talked about this problem way smarter than me. And so what I want to do today is to share with you the thoughts of two of the church fathers, uh, what they thought about this. Now, I'm focusing on the church fathers. The church fathers are men who wrote shortly after the death of Jesus Christ, and they were influenced by the Bible, of course, but they also, some of them knew the apostles, and they wrote many, many years ago commentary on these kind of questions. I would only say that the church fathers, I took a course on the church fathers, and I was really surprised. I was skeptical at first, right? I thought that the Bible was put together by a bunch of guys and men who include some books, threw away others, and the church fathers were the guys later that said, "Hey, we're going to include this, we're not going to include that." I came to understand that there was a reasoning behind that, but what was kind of cool for me and interesting was that these men were writing in like the second century, the first century, the fifth century, and they were writing the same things. They had the same thoughts about things, the same insight into spiritual questions about who God was and why God was, and what I'm about to talk to you here about, the problem of evil, why God permits bad things to happen, what is Satan. And they were writing these things independently of each other. There was no internet back then. They weren't texting each other and saying, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" They were writing things that appeared to be remarkably similar. And in fact, that was one of the ways that the church decided that these men were, quote, church fathers or not, was because they were writing things that were part of what became, the church thinks anyway, is the truth. I'm referring to the church as, now it's called the Catholic Church, but back before the Protestant Reformation, there was only the church, which was the church which was headquartered in Constantinople and Rome. And so that's who the church is and the church fathers. So what did the church fathers say about this? Obviously, this is a short podcast, and I'm not going to talk about all the church fathers, but there were two that really impacted me. One was St. Augustine of Hippo, and the other is St. Gregory of Nyssa. So I'll talk about those two very smart guys. I'm not going to come anywhere as close to doing them justice. And for those of you that are historians or study the church fathers, I apologize. But I wanted to compare at least some things that they said against what I'm reading, and I've been reading now for a couple of years since the death of my son, in terms of how souls might operate now, or they've always operated this way, not now, but just a different way of maybe looking at it. Certainly the church fathers didn't consider what spiritualists are writing about now. So St. Augustine of Hippo, Augustine was in northern Africa. That's around what is now Algeria. And Gregory of Nyssa was in what is now central or eastern Turkey. They were separated by forever. And Gregory was a century before Augustine. Gregory lived in the 300s, Augustine 400s. And here's what I'm going to start with Augustine first because he's more well known, I think. Why do bad things happen to good people? Augustine, he saw evil primarily as the lack or the loss of good. It's not that evil was a specific force or anything. It was just light or goodness exists, and that's a thing. And then when that's gone, there's darkness and absence of good. And he uses the concept of light and darkness, like when you bring a light into a room, the darkness disappears, but you don't bring darkness into a room to make the light go away. So the light is the force that dispels the darkness, and when the light's gone, darkness comes back in. So darkness is simply the absence of light. That was understandable, certainly, but he also talked about Satan. So I was struggling with both Augustine and Gregory of Nyssa. You know, Gregory of Nyssa says kind of the same thing. Evil's a lack or absence of good. Okay, got it. But what does Satan have to do with this? Is Satan a power or a force? And if he is, how can that be a power or a force or a darkness? Satan's always perceived as the Lord of darkness, I guess, or the evil one. Even though sometimes he's described in the Bible, I know, as the light bearer or the light bringer, whatever, but then Lucifer means light. But is Satan a force of evil or darkness? And that's what I struggle with both these guys. So Augustine and Nyssa said evil's the lack of good, missing good, got it. But they both said that Satan is an active force, but he has a limited role. I'm calling Satan a he. I don't know. But Satan has a limited role, which is limited by God. God permits these kind of things to happen. God permits suffering to happen. Both Augustine and Nyssa both Augustine and Gregory write that what God permits to happen, which we think is evil or suffering, has a purpose. And that purpose is the refinement of our soul. And it's to refine our faith, refine our virtue, to build our character, with the ultimate goal being perfection and the ability, therefore, to spend eternity with God. I guess this is all supposed to happen in one lifetime because that's what Augustine and Gregory both think. They don't talk about reincarnation. It's apparent they didn't believe in reincarnation, that your soul gets one shot at this, but okay. So you come here, you suffer, and that purifies your soul, and you eventually get to spend eternity with God. Now, I don't know if Augustine and Gregory specifically addressed purgatory, but the Catholic Church at least believes that nobody's going to get out of this life purified. You've got to go someplace else to be purified before you get to heaven, and that tracks with a lot of stuff that I'm going to talk about in terms of modern day spirituality. So God permits it. Suffering does happen. Got it. Here's where this does not track with my understanding of modern spirituality. And I've been reading a lot of books, and I've talked about them before in this podcast and other places, and in my book, Michael Newton and Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, Brian Weiss and Life Between Lives. And they have thousands of case studies where they've interviewed people under hypnosis, and there's a remarkably similar story about what happens to our souls when we die, and that we come here many, 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 many times to go through this purification process. The thing I found interesting about this was that Augustine, Gregory, St. Augustine, St. Gregory, and these other writers, Newton, Dr. Weiss, they all talk about our soul goes through some period of purification or suffering to learn lessons. Everybody's on board with the thought that we're trying to get to perfection, to be with God. It's just that Augustine and Gregory think that only happens one time in life, one life, whereas modern spirituality accepts all these many, many, many lives that you go through. I find it easier for me. Again, I'm not making a judgment nor trying to convince you of anything, but it's easier for me to believe that we come here many times to go through this purification. Yeah, if someone lives to my age, or to tell you how old I am, but somebody lives to my age, or 80s, 90s, whatever, yeah, you got plenty of time to make a lot of mistakes and go through a lot of suffering, and you might be closer to being purified than somebody who dies young. But what about people who die young? What about children? What about babies? What about babies that are here for just a couple of days or a couple of months? What about babies who are stillborn? What about children who die, in horrible accidents or whatever? What about their souls? I know God works in mysterious ways, and that's how we accept it. But what kind of purification or struggle have those souls gone through? And if they only have one shot at this, was that enough? I don't understand. Of course, I don't understand it, and you don't understand it either. But that's why I find it easier to believe that if we come back time and time again, we get more than one shot at this, and we learn more lessons. And also, in the modern understanding of this spirituality, and that our souls come back many times, there's a concept that we plan about what we're going to do when we come back. So there's a planning session, and you get with your soul group. I've talked about soul groups before, and I'm still trying to better understand how soul groups work and how many people are in your soul group and all that jazz. And I'm not talking about soulmates and looking at somebody across a crowded room and falling in love. I'm talking about a group of people, group of souls that you return to after this life, and that you plan another life to come back with. And sometimes that life that you plan to come back with is not about your growth. It's about someone who you want to help grow. So you might come back as a baby that dies in a couple weeks. And your role in that life, in that instance, is to teach someone else the benefit or the value of pain and suffering. They go through that experience. Their suffering and pain is caused by your death as a baby, but that's what you agreed to do. Now, you may come back again, and you're the one that lives a long time, and they die early. The point is that as much as I admire and respect St. Augustine and St. Gregory, in my tiny little infinitesimal way that I can understand them, I understand and agree and believe that, yes, there's a ramp that we're trying to climb in terms of suffering and learning, with the ultimate goal being perfection and spending eternity with our Maker. But I just don't understand how you do that in one shot, and that's why I lean towards the whole soul thing multiple times, and that's the key difference. There's no reincarnation with St. Augustine and St. Gregory. You have a single lifetime, you have one shot, and modern spirituality is that you've got many, 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 many educational and spiritual opportunities, and we continually come back and relearn. So, just wondering what you think. Some of you have been kind enough to share your thoughts with me. Many of you whom I know and love think very differently, and of course the Bible says nothing about reincarnation. There is a line in the Bible, that we live once and die and then we're judged. I know about that particular phrase in the Bible. I've also seen that interpreted multiple ways. And that's another thing about the Bible. I'm not I'm not an expert in the Bible. I don't know if I've read the entire Bible. I've read a lot of it. Many parts of it I love, but I've also seen single phrases and single sentences interpreted 10 different ways by 10 different preachers or pastors who can take one sentence apart and come up with different meanings. Or they'll go back to a different language, or they'll go back to the ancient Aramaic or the ancient Greek and interpret it differently. That's a whole profession for some people to be able to do that kind of stuff. So let me just wrap it up by saying that, though, that why do bad things happen to good people? I think it's all part of a plan to help us grow as souls and to help us learn lessons. And my humble opinion, and you certainly have your own, my humble opinion is that we get multiple opportunities to do that growth. And I believe in the writings of St. Augustine and St. Gregory of Nyssa, for example, and many other church fathers, that it's all about growth, spiritual growth. I just kind of think it happens a little differently than perhaps they outline. That's it. That's all I want to talk about for today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this with you, and look forward to talking to you again later. Bye-bye.